Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Bill Mankins. He's been on the show before. We recorded an episode with him on JJ's balcony in Playa in the middle of the night. He and Pete met working missions in the sandbox and have maintained a friendship that has evolved with their life objectives. Bill, or Manny as Pete calls him, is a peak performer in the special ops world, and his life objective is to influence circumstances and curricula for operators to be more prepared, more informed, and ultimately more effective. Bill is himself simultaneously defending two PhDs because that's how he does it. And in today's show, they talk about Bill's approach for identifying the uniquely leveraged qualities of a special operator to maximize their education specialties. It's a fascinating conversation. You've heard him before and you're going to dig him again. Here's our guest today, Bill Mankins.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick
This
Marotta.
is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Bill Mankins with Mankins Research. You're listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, this is fun. Actually, I just had Bill's friend, who I got because of Bill, Cortland Sykes, on. Cortland ran for Senate and didn't go how everybody would expect. So it's funny to have Cortland on and now talking to my... And we go back 10 years now. I don't know if you realize that, but it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, when we've done shows together where you've been a guest, we've done shows where you've been a co-host. You're doing so many incredible things. Getting a double PhD is just the beginning because you've got bigger things in the future, some of which we can't talk about, but some of which we can. And I love the overall mission of what you're trying to do. So I guess since you've been on before and talked about the Mankins Academy, let's put that aside and push people that direction, and that's an ever-evolving process. But let's talk about where you're at right now with Mankins Research and some of the things that are coming up.
Yeah, so we set up a nonprofit to do research and education. That's the charter with regard to the interface of 2 points, and that's national security and higher education. So, you know, typically these are looked at and thought of in 2 separate domains, and that's really unfortunate. And so what we're trying to do is in several ways, one with regard to actual people, personalities, talent, if you will, the HR part of assessment. And then the other is curriculum and looking at the training, what knowledge, skill, and the like are sort of next level things. I mean, if you're looking to the future in any particular way, part of that's looking to the past and part of that's seeing where things are evolving. And so when we look at the context and nature of battlefield, not only the battlefield, but of just conflict and competition in general, where the next advantages and breaks are going to be is what we're looking at, what we're doing our research and education on. So we began and now we're starting to evolve, and we're getting ready to have a first round of camps this summer. That's kind of, we're not really advertising it out. It's just for a small group of people that we're going to do basically a test and run on. And then in 2020, it'll be really open. So we're going to try to get 20 to maybe 30 students coming in this summer to run the first sort of soft round to what we're doing and develop those high school kids, 16 to 18, and give them a lot actually of knowledge, training, and education.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about your camp and how I might participate in dealing with some of the skill sets that go in. And I guess there are camps, I'll say akin to yours, just because it's hard to even say where you're at until you're actually doing the camp. But, you know, in terms of a military-themed camp for kids, those things exist. But the guys you're talking about in the curriculum you're trying to create and the skills that they're going to at least get some familiarity with are pretty incredible. I mean, I'll just talk in terms of my own contribution and like what I deliver. Like if a parent's out there like, what am I going to do with my kid? And then what kind of high-end camp can I send them to? I've got 1,000 combat missions. My job was to go out every single day and talk to people who maybe wanted to kill us or capture us. I had to figure that out every single day and bring back important information. So my ability to go out, win friends, influence people, build a network are transferable to anything, right? And then so Bill is putting together this academy where or I should say, Bill is putting together this camp where kids are going to come out and they're going to have access to these proven field warriors who's like, these are the skills and the equipment I used. I think it's such a great idea. I know as a kid, I wasn't like a soldier of fortune reading ammo can, walking around kind of kid. But something like this, it would have been awesome. I mean, I spent a lot of summers just throwing a tennis ball against the back of my house. So going out and doing some of these things would have blown my mind.
Yeah, I am with you. I mean, I was kind of always interested in some of these kind of things, but I wasn't totally obsessed kid about it either. And the things we're doing really are different, and not trying to copy anyone else. I mean, skills, specific things we're teaching, we can get into in a second, but I guess I'll back up and just say, why are we doing what we're doing? And the biggest reason for that is we're a research organization and doing education. And so one of the things we want to do is look into the future and try to get there before others. I mean, it's a competitive environment. And so to help the evolution of the soldier is kind of an interesting thing. When you think about World War II, right? You got an infantry guy, and the standard difference between an infantry guy and a, airborne that's looked at as extremely elite is a delivery system. Like, you jump out of a plane. I mean, for the most part, the distinction is relatively small. And then you go a little bit later in history and things evolve. And, instead of having a 30-man platoon where you've got a RTO, radio guy, and you've got a medical guy, and you've got a series of, one or two people with this whole group, you start moving to these sort of specialized units in which a smaller number of people can do the same amount of stuff because they have more access to firepower, and they have more people who are fewer people, but all the people are a little bit higher, we'll say, caliber, if you will, or at least have had more time and investment put into them. And as a result, fewer people can do the same as more people. And everyone learns, combat medicine right now, for example, at a basic level, right? And everybody learns to shoot all of the crew serve weapons and all these other things. So there's a lot more cross-training that occurs, and the average soldier today is way more empowered than the average soldier in 2000, who's way more empowered than the average soldier in 1970, and the like, all the way going backwards, right? So in that trajectory, if you look at that, there's a clear pattern of fewer people, higher level, more capacity, which also translates into cheaper cost for the Defense Department, right? The greatest cost of military expenditures over time are taking care of the medical needs of veterans and the human cost. And so by focusing on shifting that curve to a higher level, higher trained personnel and having fewer of them, it's an all-around benefit to everyone involved. And one of the things we're doing with that is doing some research on how to go about that. What are the things that are useful, right, in that next evolution of sort of Soldier 2040? What does that look like, and what is that person able to do?
Yeah, Secretary Mattis was working on this problem. We're all trying to figure out the future war. And actually, just a few days ago, by the way, I'm saying this in the blind, but just a few days ago, we published an episode with Will Hardy, who you have talked to before, and Colonel Jingaleski. And we talked a little bit about this future war stuff. And, at what point is China just doing what China should do? And at what point is China doing what China wants to accomplish to our detriment, and trying to balance that out while simultaneously maintaining trade. And these things are highly, highly, highly contextualized and complex at the strategic and the theoretic level. And this, and I know this, but let's just say this to all of my friends that are listening. When we look at the next fight, what we want it to be is World War II, because we understand that fight.
You're right.
We really don't want it to be any fight after that, because they're harder to understand. Korea, what do we not know about Korea? A lot of things, but in particular, how do you deal with the fact that Chinese are going to support, and the Chinese are supposed to support? Of course they want a buffer, so we're trying to deal with these things. The bottom line is this, though. If you're in a tank in a modern combat field, you're dead. You're going to get blown up by rockets. A guy's going to shoot a multi-$1,000 rocket, and it's going to kill your tank. and all that money and expertise is going to get burned up on the battlefield before you even do anything about it. So we have to figure out how to make, and this is me guessing now, Bill, this is part of my question, how to make service members that are going to be more adaptable, because the battlefield is ever evolving. It's multi-echeloned, it's spherical, it's not linear anymore.
Uh-huh.
So when you look at these things, how do you put your finger on the set of skills that is required when we don't even know what the heck we're even going to fight?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think that's why you can in a particular way that people commonly anyway try to do it, which is think of a particular set piece battle, whether it's set piece in a country X against country Y, or this group against that group, or your environmental things of land, sea, air, space, cyber, whatever. And I say that simply because we can do more effectively I shouldn't say more effectively, you can do more accurately, is to think about it in terms of patterns. One pattern, for example, is authority being pushed down. So in a typical World War II, to use that, we'll use that analogy and then come back to the present, and you can see the trends over time, and that they're, I would argue, likely to continue moving in the same trajectory that they've been. And then that can kind of point to the answer to your question, which is where is it going, or at least my best predictions. And that is this: one, that in general authority, the hierarchy of battle is flatter in some ways than it's ever been. So if you look historically at a World War II kind of environment, and you've got the degree in which 4 and 5-star generals are actively involved in operational planning, and intelligence goes up a chain, goes to set piece, decisions are made, they get pushed back down. That's a lot of movement, a lot of hierarchy that decision making has to go through. And as a result, the agile ways that people can respond are less in that environment and becoming more so, I would argue, in a new environment. A good parallel for this is the way that currently in the software industry, for example, you've got project management. And there was an older version of project management that Microsoft Project created. And if you look at the software explicitly, you can see it, in which there's this long-term, multi-year cascade kind of plan on what you need to do, when you need to do it. And first you do A, then you do B, and then you shape and control the environment based off of your moves and your actions solely. And the ways that sort of the agile world in project management and the software associated with it have made it so that you can do these little sprint kind of movements, where instead of having this long plan, because if stuff changes, you spent all this time planning, and then the context is different, and so the plan no longer is possible. So instead of doing that insane amount of planning, you do a minimum amount of planning for a very specific target for a very specific time, then you move and get to that position, and then reevaluate and create another set sprint movement and go. And I think that example parallels in some ways one of these trends, which is authority and therefore information, because of the need for faster reaction time, has to continue to trend to a lower level. And I think there's a lot of implications for that general pattern, and that is that lower level people from World War II to the present have increasingly needed to have more, with that greater need for authority due to greater need for response times, have to have the capacity to understand their environment more than ever. And ironically, one of the counterintuitive things about the structure of the military in general is that the lowest level people, right, in the organization are the ones that are pushed out on basis into the environment to do the work every day, who are in general sort of the least educated and least senior, because they're the junior officers. And you get the junior and mid-tier enlisted guys like we were. They're doing it too, but your senior enlisted are still, for the most part, again, on a base doing the management part. And so in a way, we've got to, therefore, I would argue, and this is part of what we're doing our segment of our research on and our education on, is what can you do to increase the knowledge and the learning curve, the intellectual capacity of that lower level person, the junior person, who is the person who's actually doing the stuff in the actual space, that needs to react in time and doesn't have time to wait for authority on a higher chain of command to turn around and dictate or explain what it is they need to do. And I would argue is a general trend that in the future we're going to need to require significantly more education and training for entry into these combat arms and intelligence positions specifically.
Right.
I mean, that's one pattern. There's many of them, but that's one to give you an example.
Sure. Well, let's play in this pattern, because you and I have been something in between that spot where, and we've had these conversations on the show and everything, but what we do is special. It's special operations level, but it's not recognized as that. There is no branch of us. Even the people that do it with us, frankly, don't often have my respect, present company excluded, of course, because they haven't built the necessary skill set to go out and, the syllabus is blank when you do what we do. You come out and the commander says, I want to figure out why the locals won't take aid. I'll get you that answer. I have no idea what the first question is, and I'm not going to know. I have to get out there, and I have to do that. But I need that commander's backing to say, yeah, all right, start talking to me with reports. I'll guide you when I hear things from above. But there's an actual exchange of information, and I can tolerate a lot of ambiguity and a lot of danger that a lot of other people can't do. You're not describing a lower enlisted person when you describe what we do.
Yeah, and so in a way, so there are two parts here. One is I'm thinking, and I'm discussing this in general, but then if you talk about the way that's actually integrated into U.S. forces, there's pattern of warfare that I'm describing, and then there's how that may manifest in our forces. And there's the way that those forces have been structured in the past. There's the way they say might be structured in the future, and those could change. So in the past, DoD has not chosen, because it didn't feel the need or didn't believe it had the capacity to, either way, it's the same result, which is to create an internal capability that can actually do that. Because it does take, a greater, it takes a certain kind of person. So there's an HR component to that. And then it's the raw talent. And then B, it takes a certain level of kind of training in order to get that person there. Right. And so you can't, if you're going to build a high-speed dragster, or you're going to build a high-speed race car, or you're going to build a surgeon, you can't do it in a short time, and you can't do it just willy-nilly. And not all people are either capable of it, right? And not all people are willing to or able to endure the grind or the level of learning that has to happen. So it's those two things of capacity and training. And in general, in an industrial style warfare environment, because that's what we're transitioning away from it, but it's awful slow, in which the plug and play mindset of industrial society. So here's a general concept and a pattern also that I would argue is the second sort of pattern I would talk about of the future of warfare, which is in the past, in industrial societies, you have the factory. It's plug and play. It's interchangeable parts. Not only is the thing, like the car tire or the clutch, interchangeable, this one goes bad, you replace it with a new one, but the people themselves in the factory are interchangeable. And they're done so that if one person goes down or whatnot, everyone doesn't have to be a master craftsman, right? That's the general transition to industrial society, where before you had people who were the artisan or the craftsman. I am a blacksmith and this is what I do, and I'm a master of being a blacksmith. And not everybody can just hop in and be a blacksmith, or I'm a painter, or I make furniture. This is what I do. Instead, you create factories where anybody can be plug and played into the system, because all they do is pound this particular nail into this particular place, and they do it 100,000 times a week, right? The assembly line. And so that is really useful, and in a certain time period, a certain epoch, and in certain locations. And as a result, you get a certain kind of warfare out of that, which is you get draft style warfare, where anybody can be pulled off, in theory, right, out of society and plug and play into any position that the Defense Department has. And so all of the systems, all the training are designed to be, it's not dumbed down. It's to say that they're mechanized to a very interchangeable way. And so you do paint by numbers instead of artists. You reduce it down and say, anybody can know that if it's a number 1, we paint it yellow. If it's a number 2, we paint it blue. If it's number 3, we paint it this. And here's the set of colors so that you can't screw up the shades of blue, right? It's really controlled, really preset, really designed. And this is pretty much what we've done. And because we've built it that way, largely personality or interest or skill doesn't play into the recruiting process. And so the units are not in any way really designed, any of the units really are designed to do this. Medicine and a couple of the other specialties aside, but again, those are not martial units. I mean,
Right.
when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about specifically the martial units. So intelligence and ones that use weapons, combat arms, they're designed to be plug and play. And I think that one of the things in the future is going to be, this is a long answer to your rather simple question of one of those things in the future is going to be a more tailored need to look at intelligence and special operations with regard to the raw material and capabilities of that individual far beyond just their physical ability, which is what soft special operations does, and far beyond their, ASVAB score, which again is an industrial test to look at how well people can, see how gears move and can code words in administration. Like, it has its place, but it's such a small speck in the current situation. So now that I've explained my take on that and that trajectory, I'll answer your question, which is I think that the current structure doesn't allow for it, which is exactly why people like you and I were brought in on to advise on the outside, is because there's a recognition that, hey, here's something that our current personnel system and our current education and training system doesn't get us people who can do X. So we're going to outsource it. We're going to bring it in with highly specialized folks in times of need, which is one way to do it, but I would argue it's not the best way to do it. And I don't think it's how it will be done in the future, because those skills, as you say, it's artist. And I don't mean that in some kind of, arrogant chest beating kind of way. I mean, just saying, if you want something beyond paint by numbers, you've got to get people who are artists to do it. And then you've got to set up HR systems that are able to accurately identify artists of a given trade. If you want someone to be a sculptor, you've got to find ways to measure and find sculptors. If you want craftsmen, you've got to find people who can do this. And the system's not designed to do that. You know as well as I do, you look at any of the special operations training, 99% of it is you go through the meat grinder and you throw a bunch of people in and you throw the spaghetti against the wall and you see what sticks. And that's why dropout rates are what they are and whatever else. And I challenge anybody on this in that you look at the graduation rates of any of those special operations units, you look at them in general, and then you look at them when people have 4 years of training from the academies. Those officers have almost 100% graduation rate. And the reason is because the time, effort, and energy that was spent into the selection of those people is totally different from the time, effort, and energy spent just pulling people off the street and plug and play. And even with the recent last 10 years of evolution within the special operations training, because they've seen this. I mean, they're not stupid people, right? They're really smart. But they see the need for it. It's just a matter of how to do it. And they've started creating these additional pipelines and additional screening tools to try to improve that. So they're making progress and they're on the right paths. What we're doing is just looking way down the road and saying, how can we really get ridiculously sharp on that? And those skills that you're talking about and trying to convince a commander, I mean, that's the problem with the structure, right? Is that now you've got an outsider who's got to come in and try to establish internal credibility, as we did, and try to, with each unit that rolls in and rolls out, and then try to, use those skills in a way that you can demonstrate it and then gain that credibility. Whereas if it was an internal unit asset that could be developed and you had another person attached, that would be different. And it's funny, like medicine's like this, right? For a long time, you might say there weren't highly medically trained people. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, instead of relying on surgeons at bases forever miles away, why don't we create our own little medical guys that are actually pretty skilled? And then you take it to the elite level and you say, let's create 18 deltas, right, that are really skilled and can do all this stuff. Wouldn't it be great if we had this asset and this capability actually on the battle space with us? I mean, this is functionally the same thing. It's just, it hasn't got there yet.
Right. Well, that was a great answer and a good, a long background on all of these things. And one of the reasons why I do these shows and one of the reasons why I do the whole podcast is to try to explain some of this stuff, because I don't presume to know the answers, but I know how to ask the questions. And you talked about the artistic approach that we take. And one of the things that we do, so if an artisan is going to build a bronze statue of LeBron James that's going to be out in Cleveland, they make, increasingly larger mini statues. Maybe they sell them off. Maybe they throw them back into the fire and smash him to 1,000 pieces because he keeps looking like Michael Jordan instead or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they play with it. We're the same way. You know, I'll throw some paint on the canvas and see how blue works this day. And it turns out I keep needing red. And so I keep wadding it up on the ground and throwing it away.
Yeah.
So, like, if you watch me work, you don't know I'm working. You just think I'm having a bunch of conversations. But there's a lot going on in my artistic side of my head as I try to make sense of what I'm seeing, because I'm really trying to translate. This is ultimately what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to translate a different reality to an alternate reality and able to visit both places. That's what makes me valuable. I can enter the local reality enough to get enough of it to bring that back and say, this is what you're dealing with. These are the people that, you know, but even in there, I've got to earn credibility within their circles to get that. And that's why when the Taliban, you know, say we met the guy with the beard and he's honorable, you know, and you know this because you've done the same exact things. That happens over the course of time and with a lot of discomfort and a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
We're not built to tolerate those kind of mistakes. And also, our system currently is very monolithic so that, you know, the hierarchies of the command, you know, we could be doing ground changing stuff at the battalion level and the division boils it down to one line. And then you're like, hey, we'd like to come present at the We're Doing Incredible Things in the Field conference. And they're like, yeah, you're not invited. Like, what? We're not invited. Like, you've literally named the thing after the thing we're doing and we can't get 10 minutes. So, and this is in no way putting down people at the higher echelons, but you have like the army or division level political officer who's never been on the ground, doesn't have a degree in the area that we're in, and they're providing advice, and I can't even get in the room internally.
Yeah.
It's crazy to expect different outcomes as you illustrate this whole system. You have these artisans on the ground that are doing something potentially incredible, making a lot of mistakes and tolerating that to get to where the fertile ground is. And building a system that tolerates that. I mean, can you imagine if we had a tab that instantly gave us bona fides with any commander? Like, oh, you guys do that incredible shit that no one else can do. You know, like you guys talk to you know, goats and that kind of thing. Like, yeah, we're those guys. But we don't have that. And there isn't a skill identifier. Maybe you've got so in the military, you can have a skill identifier like parachutist or linguist or instructor. So you can show up and say, well, I'm hotel identified. And they're like, yeah, great. Prove it to me that you can teach. Like, even those don't work. Like, everybody always wants you to prove it. So this goes to the complexity of the things that we're trying to deal with in a way that's combat has been democratized. Anybody can go onto Amazon and buy a weapon system.
Yeah.
Whether it's a drone or whatever, anybody can do it and create their own. You don't have to raise an army. You just got to raise enough money to be a pain in the ass to create the impact that you want.
Yeah.
Whew. All right. So now that I've said that.
You just said something I think is really, really insightful. And that is about, you know, I don't know exactly how you said it, was something effective, powerless, or I've got to do this to influence. And I would just say this, you know, my definition, one of the things my dissertation is about is the capacity to have power, as I'm defining it, okay, is the ability to make the present into the way you want it. So aside from the philosophical aspect of there really is no future, there's just only the present. We happen to sleep, which is why we feel like there's a future. But really, there really is only the present. So when you change the present to be different, you could call it change the future, you have the capacity to make things the way you want them. And if you don't, then you are powerless. And if you do, you are powerful. And of course, that's a spectrum, and you can be varying degrees of powerful or powerless, and that can vary on topic as well, right? So one of the things that the military is designed to do is to be an arm that allows the United States to create the situation that it wants, to create reality as it wants it to be. So it's a tool in the power kit to try to change the present into the future that it wants. And I would argue that in the current environment, not just current, but the last little while, that skill set needs to be in that the toolbox needs to be slightly modified, because it's not what it takes to create that desired reality is not simply the capacity to destroy tanks, planes, and boats, nor has it ever been. But I would say it's more complex now than ever before. And when you look at what it takes then to change the present, and in this case, when you said that, you meant I have to convince them meaning people that you don't have authority over by influence. You've got to and tell that battle space commander something. Or in a non-war environment, you have to convince the ambassador to let you do A, B, C, or D, right? Any of these situations, it's a matter of I can only have power. I can only make things the way I want them and get what I want if I can make things what I want them to be, if I have the capacity to do certain things. And I would argue that power, right, is composed of knowledge, skill, wisdom, and it's all created by discipline. And when I say that, I mean, in order to really know what you've got, to have the capacity to make the future what you want, you have to understand your context and environment. There's a knowledge piece there. And that's really complex that I've packaged into one word, knowledge. But in general, it's the ability to externally understand your external environment and your place in it. So we could use the sports analogy and say, if I'm to be a powerful player, I have to not only understand my opponent, I have to understand the rules of the game. If I don't understand the rules of the game, but I understand my opponent, I can still make stupid choices or not call a certain thing that I should call and get a penalty. Like, you have to understand both the rules of the game and the opponent, and then also yourself, right, to know how you can best maneuver against said opponent under certain contexts. Here we call the rules. So there's that knowledge piece that's really critical. The skill piece, and I would argue the knowledge piece is the thing that we do the least, by far the least. So we create a force that's designed to fight anybody, anywhere, and anybody who knows anything about business or organizations in general, if you're designed to do everything everywhere, you're designed to do nothing everywhere. And so specialization matters, and whether that's specialization within a specific force or specialization against specific targets, specific countries, that's an issue. And I'm not picking on us. I think the United States does a pretty good job of that. But I am saying the knowledge of the particular places, that is to say the particular opponents, and that knowledge at the lowest levels of the people who actually do the warfighting is probably the lowest ever. The 15-minute PowerPoint brief before you go to country X is not sufficient to know about place X, opponent X, and the rules. And I mean this way, I don't mean just rules of engagement. I mean cultural rules, cultural norms, ways to work and influence and manipulate said local population to get the desired end state that you want. So that knowledge is the lowest thing. The skill thing, I think, also is interesting. We focus on martial skills, which are really important. I mean, it's military, right? Particularly in the combat arms and intelligence. But I would argue that there's lots of other skills that are necessary to have power. In this case, those are skills that you are obviously very familiar with, because this is what we did, which is, you're either talking about the skills of communication and skills of utilizing said interpreter and using them effectively, or mastering a language yourself and doing it effectively, or understanding things like as that are really critical but untrained, like in general, such as body language. I mean, intelligence personnel who are high-end folks are given some of that, but if you look at a percentage of time spent on learning to handle an M4 versus or communicate on radio versus how much percentage of time is spent learning to interpret someone else's physical movements and behavior, those are two. The percent's just way different. And both, I would argue, are critical. And then the last thing is the wisdom part, of knowing when to apply what skills in what context. And as a result, knowing the matrix is one thing, having the skills to move in the matrix is the other, and then the wisdom to know when to apply what skills to what context is everything. And you can only develop those skills with the daily discipline, that knowledge, the daily discipline of the work it takes to get there. And that daily discipline usually is one-off, meaning it's not institutionalized. So we institutionalize certain kinds of training and certain kinds of knowledge gathering, right? We institutionalize ranking recognition. So everybody learns that. They learn it in boot camp. Everyone learns certain skills and knows the velocity of a 5.56 round and knows, what speed is a knot. And these things that are deemed important And then we test and evaluate those things. And we do so with a daily discipline rigor it makes it ingrained.
Yeah.
And I would argue we don't do that in some of these other things that I think in the future, due to authority getting pushed down, to knowledge needing to expand at that lower level. I also leave it with this piece of it with these two things. One, to tie what we've been talking about together. I think this knowledge piece of it is critical because the vertical compression of authority. So when authority was really high and high-level individuals made tactical decisions, the low-level person did not need to have lots of knowledge. They didn't need to understand their context that much beyond a tactical, like trigger-pulling engagement firepower standpoint. But when that compression occurs and authorities needs to go lower, then context, that knowledge is critical. And we don't train people at the low levels to have that level of knowledge because we don't require it, right? If you then look at the other thing that's going on, which is the skill piece, I think there's a horizontal compression that's been going on historically. These are two historical trends: vertical compression of knowledge, so the low guy becoming more powerful, and horizontal compression of skill, in which more skills are compressed into one individual instead of spread out amongst multiple individuals. And in both of those compressions, it leads you over time to say the lowest level combat arms and intel guys on the ground have to be about twice as good as what they are today. And I don't mean that because they're bad today. What I mean is the future demands of those moving trajectories are going to require, just no different than the master's degree is the new bachelor's degree in the sense, right? Or the capabilities of a World War II soldier who got their, 6 weeks of boot camp and are thrown in the mix, as opposed to the multi-years of preparation that the standard special operations guy goes through. That might end up being 4 years of preparation instead of 2. Yeah. That might require a master's degree and an area study instead of just a bachelor's. There's a lot of ways this may manifest in the future, but I think those two trajectories are undeniable.
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
There's a lot of ways this may manifest in the future, but I think those two trajectories are undeniable.
So just to add some context for the audience, we're having a pretty high-level discussion here, which I know they can handle, but there used to be a guy called the sapper, and that was his job. Whenever they hit something that needed to be blown up so they could push through a wall, a bunch of barbed wire, that was that guy's job, and he carried those tools. That is now a task. So in World War II, you had a guy that's like, get me the sapper, boom, blow up, we're running through. And I'm really simplifying here, but that was what that guy did. Now it's like, oh, we have an obstacle that we're going to blow up, whether it's a doorway or a berm, it's not that person's only job. So this goes to what Bill was saying. It's like war has become a lot more complex. Like, you've got this bandolier explosive around your chest because we always have that, but also you're the medic or whatever. Oh, I wanted to back out a little bit. You talk about matrix, and the thing, again, that I always experience that I don't know how to solve is that if we do look at like a multinodal matrix, and in my brain it's very cube-like and works, but in reality, let me push pause on that and come back to that and say the tasks required on the ground are completely different than the tactics that we're trained for. And this is kind of what we're talking about, like knowing the velocity, the muzzle velocity of, and the effective range of an M4 rifle, or whatever it's going to be, whatever weapon system it is, that super detailed knowledge that allows you to correct and engage the enemy, close with and destroy, right? That's what we want to do. Those skills are becoming less important, and yet they're still trained as the most important thing. And understandably so, because there's an ethical problem of not training combat soldiers for combat.
Right.
Unpause. Okay, so now we're back in my matrix again. And it's sort of this cubicle, multinodal thing where someone like you and I, we can see a bigger matrix than, say, the military can, because they culturally aren't allowed to see it. It's just not what they do. So one matrix is very, Western. It's Germanic. It's 15 dots high and 27 dots left, and and another 50 dots wide, and we know how to navigate within that matrix because we've been in the military. And then you bring in this like caramelized flowing matrix that only you can see from certain angles. It's almost like an alternate reality that, again, you and I can go see.
Yeah.
And that's like the local environment, the tribes and government and how they interweave. But then there's also, on top of that, this fledgling Western democracy-based governmental structure that doesn't work right. And so you have all these choke points and dead ends where effort is put in to, let's say, fund the Ministry of Agriculture. And you're trying to get that capacity to come to the ground. That's an independent structure in terms of how the military sees it to theirs, but it's really not, because they're impacting that structure directly. So bad partnership at any level in that chain, that government chain, is going to cause impacts that are negative upwards and downwards in that scale. I know I'm getting really complex and trippy here, but the point is that all these inputs into this matrix create outcomes that make the desired goal, the desired reality for right now that you talked about earlier, impossible where Bill and Pete and Will are on the ground, and Dr. Ledet. All of us are out there looking for these realities, and we simply can't find them. And primarily, the thing that I have learned is that our input, our institutional input into that system is not creating a reliable good outcome, and therefore it creates a reliable instability generator. So our desire to teach Afghan reporters how to report creates instability in the region, because they're certainly not creating stability through this effort to teach these guys how to go out and report. And the reason why I say all this really weird shit and try to explain something I can't explain is modern combat is really hard. It's a struggle for power. It's a struggle for culture. It's a struggle for all these different things. And what Bill is trying to explain and what I'm trying to see if I understand is methods and means of creating people that can go in and kind of detoxify this matrix and say, just do less damage, and then maybe we have a chance.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Do less damage. Yeah, I mean, a lot of well-meaning, there's so many people in the mix and so many entities and interest groups. It's funny, to kind of tag on to what you're saying, I'll talk about two things. One's dimensions versus color, and that's one issue. And then the other is the idea of monolithic or single interests. So directly to your second point, the monolithic idea that somehow the United States is an actor, for example, in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or wherever, the Straits of Malacca, you name it. It's not. No different than it is to say the Afghans, right, or the Chinese, or any other aspect of it. And then because it's not that way, that's what makes it complicated. So, for example, as we talked about in the podcast last week with John Murphy, and his experiences in Vietnam and ours in Afghanistan, that's you can see it huge. The State Department has its own interests, which may or may not conflict with the CIA, which may or may not conflict with Department of Defense, which may or may not conflict with various NGOs, right? And that's on the home teams, what's perceived to be unified interest, America, when actually America doesn't do anything. Organizations within America do stuff, and sometimes they have conflicting interests and sometimes they don't. And furthermore, individuals within organizations actually do stuff. Organizations kind of organize some effort, but individuals do stuff. And so an individual battle commander or individual soldier or an individual thing may have a completely conflicting interest or desire, or a slightly different conflicting interest or desire than others. And so when you do that in a single battle space, it gets really hard, because the unification of action, that is to say strategy, an understood end state, an understood method, an understood and unified execution, I don't want to say it becomes impossible, but it becomes really difficult to do. And that's true with our oppositions as well. And it's true when we need to think about our oppositions as well, which is, the Afghan people or the American people are not real in the sense that there are multiple Afghans with very different interests, and there are multiple Americans with many different interests. And so anytime, there's any one takeaway I'd probably say from the the last 5 minutes of me talking is anytime you hear somebody on TV or anywhere else say, well, the American people, next time you hear American politicians, it's such a joke. Or, the news and anywhere talking about the people of wherever, they have no idea what they're talking about. Or they do, and they're just conniving, because that's not real. And so getting our own interests in alignment is a really important piece, and why that mess you're talking about exists. And then the other thing I'll talk about is the dimensions in color, which was kind of funny. You're talking about understanding the battle space, and a metaphor I think that's maybe useful is dimensions versus color, where you were saying, hey, certain people come in and they see it like this, and another person's they see it like that. And a way to kind of give a metaphor to explain that is, one unit might come in, and due to their level of understanding of the complexity and the angle at which they view the problem, right? Isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Describe how they see it. And so somebody may have a low level of understanding and may see something in, 2 dimensions only, right? Somebody a little more complex might have a 3-dimensional view of something. And another person may have a 4th-dimensional view, right? So I can't think of the name of it right now. It's escaping me. This is a great book it's a metaphor about a 2-dimensional object that, can only see in 2 dimensions, and it bumps into another 2-dimensional object. And as a result, it's not able to see in 3D, but there's another object that's a 3D object that's trying to describe 3D to a 2D object, and it can't see. It sees a line as a line without having to see it that there's depth to it, right? So
Yeah.
it can only see this way. So that complexity is based off of your knowledge and what you can see. Can you see the 4th dimension, where it's not just the object in 3D, but it's the object in 3D that moves in different points in space, right? And then the other one is the color, right? Because do you have an 8-box Crayola crayon set, and that's the only 8 colors you see in? Or do you see in 16, 32, or 64 color box? And that complexity and variation determines whether you can see in 4D and 64, grain. Unfortunately, we have a lot of just, I would argue again, because of our training, because of our HR requirements, and because of how we approach building the team and training the team, due to the needs of past experiences that are different today and will further be different in the future, we do a lot of 2D hiring and 8 crayon box hiring, and try to train them to be 3D and 16 crayon boxes.
Yeah.
And that's useful in many places, but what we need to think about in the future is how do we up the ante across the board and get more 3D people to get them to 4D? And how do we get 32 crayon boxes and get them up to 64? And that requires raising the level of what's required for entry. It requires raising the level of what's required in the training in order to get those people to see in greater granularity and complexity. And that's not just in DoD. I mean, that's everywhere.
There's something I want to take your complexity thing, and I want to make it even harder, because it's really hard to do what we do, right? And so when that dude has that, so this is what Bill is. Bill's got his 64 color crayon set, right? And he goes out and someone's like, here, and they put a carrot in there, and he's like, perfect. Exactly what I need. He knows, yes, a carrot in a crayon set. Yeah, he's like, I get it. Now let me figure out why there's a carrot in here and what I need to do with it. And it turns out he throws all them fucking crayons out, and he's got 100 different things in there. And he's like, this is what their world looks like. It doesn't work in terms of, and this is what you're saying with like the dimensions and the colors. You come back with this bag of rocks and sticks and a chicken foot and all these other things, and then you bring that back to the command, and you're like, this is what happened. And so now let me go back to the military side. That commander, that unit that comes in, it's like close with and destroy, close with and kill the enemy. Someone just said just the other day, one of the top generals in Afghanistan, that we're going to, go out and smash the Taliban. Like, dude, every unit that goes there keeps making little adjustments to their orientation, right? They saw the problem in one way, then they get in the ground. And like we talked with John Murphy, it's totally different. And then while you're on the ground, the realities that you have to gather to understand what might be reality is something completely different than what they're even prepared once they have the orientation. And then they run out of time to actually act within their new acceptance of this new reality. So they all know they move. What they lack is the ability to get to that movement point quicker and then actually get to working on the impossible problem of what to do once they have a better orientation.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just, yeah, like you said, the Manning problem. Like there was a major that came in. Let me just, I'll say this, and then I'm going to really shut up and let you finish out. We have this belief that the person before us, and this is not just military, this is everywhere, that other people don't do enough, that they're lazy. And in some cases, sure, there's people that don't do enough. Maybe there's no point in being the best worker at the DMV, so who fucking tries, right? But they're doing the best they can within their system. So my challenge to people is always like, okay, you go stack up the people that don't work hard enough and aren't giving their best, or at least doing their darndest to give their best, and I'll go stack up the people that are doing their best. I'm going to find more people because pretty much everybody's trying their best.
Mm-hmm.
So if everybody's trying their best and we're not getting to where we want, it's not that they aren't doing that or that person's I've heard someone call an Afghan leader a basket case. We went and talked to him and he's like, I'm just kind of busy right now, fellas. I got to figure out how to spend my year-end budget money. And Rich and I look at each other like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, I got to go. I got this budget money. I got to spend it. And I got this sidewalk project that you guys are kind of screwing up on. And I got to go talk. Like this guy was actually governing. Maybe he's shitty at it, but he's not a basket case. But that's what we were told before we met with this guy. So I guess what I'm trying to illustrate for the audience is the stuff that Bill is talking about, getting us to these points where when you come back with a different things in the box because you enter a whole different dimension, you enter a seventh dimension or dimension basketball or whatever it is, and those things aren't supposed to make sense. You have these different values. If you accept that most everybody is working as close to hard as they can within their system. Yeah, this person works 10% harder than that person. I don't care about that. That's so unimportant to me. What can they do in their system? They won't show up to work. It's not that they suck. That's a complete, you whiffed on that. What is keeping them within their system from wanting to show up? Oh, well, because of all these legitimate things that are out there. Like, you mean all of these 30 problems, if we can start to take care of those, you'll show up to work? Yeah, great. Well, that's where the work is.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. That focus area is where it's at, and oftentimes let's just say the focus is on the wrong part, and the judgment of the environment's in the wrong part. And what's important to make a distinction here, which you just made. I'm going to make it even more emphatic, which is there's a big difference between effort and current capability, and all organizations have a certain percentage of people that are far less that are less than perfect in their effort, a little bit lazy. But my experience in the intelligence world and also in DoD and all that stuff, and just there's very few people who aren't extremely motivated. Most people I've met are highly motivated and highly ambitious and want to get somewhere and want to be productive. So it's interesting that I in no way think, and I don't think you do either, that sort of effort or desire is the problem, which is why even goes more so to articulating that why I think specific people, no different than in a business or any other kind of organization, aligning talent to task, right, raw material to task is super key. And then giving said training is super key, because you can have really motivated people who just simply don't have the capacity to do something that well, and they're going to spend a lot of effort and energy trying to do something that they're just not designed to do. And the other option is you're going to have great talented people who have a great desire to do something and then don't get any training for it and then can't do it, even though they really, really want to. And in both cases, that's a systematic architecture failure of the organization, not the person. And so I say that to say it's, which I know but to say to our listeners, problems that Pete and I are articulating, the ones we're wrestling with, are not personnel problems or whatever in terms of individual effort or people being lazy or calling out DOD or anybody else for being bad or pathetic, as much as it is saying there is a structural problem here that's going on, that's fielding a situation in said battle space in which the players that are present aren't able to do and be all that they can be because of the structure of the system, and that needs to actually be modified. And you and I are wrestling with ways to do that. And specifically, I know you were thinking of placing within either specifically within a unit or creating some kind of formal position that gives someone some kind of tabular recognition that allows them to instantaneously be recognized, approved, and integrated into a given unit and their operations, right? So when a guy with a trident or a guy with a long tab or a guy with a, CIA designation rolls into a place, people listen because it's known who they are and what their capability is, and it's recognized automatically. And therefore, it gives a shorthand that doesn't need explanation. So the credibility gap's already there. And because of what you and I do, and people like us, that doesn't exist in a formalized way. Therefore, every single time you go to a new place with every single group, they all naturally go, yeah, but who are you and what do you do? And how do I know you can actually do that, right? And so you're constantly in this several months of build, prove, demonstrate. And then, you could move so much more efficiently if that credibility was there with that shorthand of the badge. And for me, I'm agreeing with you. I think that's one of the answers that needs to happen. And I think in addition to that, and that's the one that our organization's really working towards, is to really have a hard look at the structural problems within that tie together three things: HR, education and training, and actual operations. Because right now, those are largely studied and looked at in isolation. They're silos.
Yeah.
And what could be looked at is what kinds of people are really good at influencing foreign people, of understanding foreign people and foreign places. And this is one of the things we're doing. And you look and you create a list of metrics, of attributes that are useful there, and then a series of tests and instruments that can help identify those specific attributes in people and say, for example, empathy in general is probably not the highest trait you would say is useful, right, for an 11 Bravo infantryman. Most people would say less empathy is good because you shoot people for a living, right? At the same time, in most places, that's actually, in I would argue, modern warfare, that's actually not true. Empathy is really useful because you need to be able to put yourself in the position of said local person to understand their reality and therefore manipulate it. And if you can't do that, you can't do that skill. I mean, you can't have that effect. You don't have that skill, and therefore can't have that level of power. And by articulating some of those things, we're hoping to move the needle in the HR and connecting the actual selection of people to the performance in the battlefield. And then the second issue is looking at that curriculum and saying, okay, once you have a set group of people that has the capacity, raw capacity, how do you train them up? And this is no different than an NFL coaching situation, right? As you look and you go, well, I could either plug and play with anybody off the street, which is what high schools do, and say, here's what we're going to play with because this is what's in our town. Or you do what colleges do, in which you say, you know what, we got a national capacity to go out and recruit. And we're going to actively go out and recruit very specific people under very specific prototypes for very specific positions and attach talent to, I don't have a defensive back body playing defensive end in college football. You might get that in high school because that's what you got to do, right? That's who you got. Yeah. But at the college level, if you want and you're willing to take the time and you're willing to put in the resources, you can actually go get exactly what you want for a given position. But that requires you to know what that position is going to do, how they're going to function, what they really need to be good at, and articulate those attributes in a meaningful way, and then create instruments to identify them. And that's what we're doing.
And that's for people that are playing a damn game. Like, you want to go play water polo, I need a guy who's 6'5", throws 65 miles, and like you can name those things. And they're playing a damn game. They're not playing combat.
Yeah, man. You look at what's time, effort, and energy that's put into that to things like the NFL draft. I would argue this.
It's such a great.
In general, people, what is valued gets value put on it, and the amount of value that's actually spent, in this case, money, energy, resources, right? Human attention and dollars is put towards figuring out ways to pick top talent and align top talent. I mean, here's one example I'll say. So Lou Holtz, for any of your listeners who, I don't know, now maybe I'm showing my age here, but there's certain coaches that are really, really good, right? Because it's not a unified talent, really good at aligning talent to position. And there's others that are less good. And those that are really good at it can take someone, and they have the capacity to say, look at somebody and go, you would be an All-American cornerback, but if we switched you to receiver, and you can go to the next level, you can be a lead guy.
Yeah.
And that ability, because it really is an ability, some people have it more raw than others, but there are ways and metrics you can look at to say, this person will be really good here, but they'll be phenomenal there. And what we do instead is limit our things to, this person is colorblind, so they can't fly. Or this person can't think in 3D, so they won't be a good mechanic.
Right.
They didn't do well on the gear test on the ASVAB, right? Those things are useful. But I would again argue they're a 10%, if you were to, I'm making that number up, but if you were to look on the schedule of 1 to 100 and say, what could we do with our current knowledge and ability, our current technology to better identify and allocate human capacity to task, we could be doing so much better than we're doing for very little cost, just by giving the time and attention to it and creating better systems to match. And therefore, you get a team that even if you have, in theory, the same team, that team is aligned better because the people are in the positions that are most suited for them and can help the team the best. But in this case, it's even more than that, because it's even going and getting the talent you want on the team.
That was awesome. Super deep dive into strategy. But like, as we start to put all these pieces together in my own combat matrix that we're building here on the show, it's such a big piece, man. I mean, we've really covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate you taking the time. And we never did get into politics, but then again, this stuff just lays right on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah, we will do next time, Pete, because it is, anytime you're doing picking, you're by definition being political. Even I don't mean party-based politics, but I mean you're deciding, how things should be, which is inherently political. So, yeah.
And without opening a can of worms, we also do a shitty job in the selection process. We make the most complicated, complex job in the world so shitty, nobody who could actually maybe handle it actually wants that job. It's just all egomaniacs and influencers that get a chance at it. And it's like those two traits, egomaniacs and social influencers, aren't what I recognize as being presidential qualities.
Yeah. I'm with you.
All right, dude. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you coming.
All right, brother. Take care.